See, hello. Is this on? It's Colum Lynch again from the Senior Global Correspondent for Devex. We're very excited to have Mr. Mahmoud Mohieldin here to talk to us. He is both Special Envoy on the SDGs and also a champion on the COP27 meeting for Egypt. So we're very lucky and grateful that you've come and given us the time to talk. So why don't I put down my mic and we can get going, okay?
All right, thank you.
Okay, why don't we, I mean, you have two hats, right, on the SDG and climate. So why don't we just talk briefly on, we've had a lot of conversations about how all the sort of indexes on human development, on SDGs, how nobody's meeting the targets, things are not going well. The Secretary General talks in terms of the world in a state of peril. So maybe why don't you sort of talk a little bit about the SDGs, why you think they're there's such a difficulty in achieving the goals, and whether there's really any hope of getting anywhere near the goals of 2030.
Well, there is a short popular answer that you can blame it on the shocks that the world had been exposed to from the COVID crisis and then the war in the Ukraine. But you may remember that back in 2019, the Secretary General of the UN published a plea for getting the SDGs more seriously. There was a call for action. There was a new finance framework that was proposed in 2019. And of course, after that, COVID took the attention. Why the progress on the SDGs was not really as expected in many countries. There are some countries that are taking them very seriously. Many of the OECD countries, some of the emerging markets in Asia. China is doing fantastically well. I would I remember in December 2019, they said that next year, 2020, China will deal with SDG 1 by having nobody suffering from extreme poverty, which happened. I'm talking about the matter globally. So I would say, based on the experience as well of the MDGs, some problems related to data and the evidence required to support policies, some of the issues related to finance from all of its sources, the public, the private sources of finance, the external finance was not adequate, the famous 0.7% of ODA was not sufficient and didn't really increase much. I remember when we were discussing the Finance for Development framework for Addis back in 2013, 2014 in preparation of the July endorsement of FFD, the figure was around $130 billion. As we speak today, the figure of ODA didn't really increase much. In dollar terms, we're talking about an average of 150 billion. And as you know from OECD figures, at the time, the gap was around $2.5 trillion per annum for developing economies. Now, after COVID and other shocks, is north of $4 trillion. Then, of course, you can say after COVID and Ukraine, we had more problems that have been reflected in the deterioration of major SDGs, including poverty and nutrition.
Right. Well, I know our time is somewhat limited, so I'm going to be jumping around to different topics very quickly. It'll be like speed dating. But I wanted to talk a little bit about climate. Everybody is sort of anticipating COP27. You were sort of the major host of that meeting. This week, I'm curious how you see the sort of degree of commitment to it. It was interesting, and President Biden did talk about goals that the Americans had set in the United States, but I don't think he even mentioned COP27. That was kind of interesting. He's really been focusing on the Ukraine war. President Macron, I don't believe he attended the roundtable yesterday. Do you get the sense that there's not a sense of urgency and commitment that there needs to be right now? And are you sort of concerned about coming into Sharm el-Sheikh, what sort of commitments you'll be able to sort of achieve, what kind of pledges you'll be able to get from governments?
Right. So let me bring some devils because they are in the details. Because if you are talking about climate action, it's many elements, and it depends really in what area, what sector you are talking about. Mentioning President Macron, like with other countries, I like to commend their leadership, at least with the proxy of adhering to their commitments of the 100 billion, the famous Copenhagen promise, which is actually, by the way, if everybody's committing to the 100 billion, this is no more than 3% of the gap required for climate action. But it's good that some leaders said that we are going to deliver, and they are delivering. France, Germany, few Nordic countries, Canada, Japan. I wish to say the same about others. What's happening in the US, especially by the new bill, is very good on the inflation reduction because it has a lot of investments associated to it. But globally, it's the 4 areas. Mitigation is progressing, but we need more scale and more opportunities for private sector and more partnerships leveraging the private sector. In presence of my friends here from the European Investment Bank, it's a good example of what they are doing in leveraging. Adaptation, well, there are some experiments, but still dependent on public finance. Latest report from the Global Center for Adaptation, launched a few days ago in Rotterdam, is saying that contribution of private sector is no more than 3%. So still the majority, actually almost all funding of adaptation is coming from public sources, domestic or external. Loss and damage is a sad, pathetic case, especially when we're talking now and referring to the misery that our sisters and brothers are suffering from in Pakistan. And this is basically something to do with lack of commitment to dealing with one of the important articles of the Paris Agreement on loss and damage. Finance, this is the 4th file, as you know. Well, if you take a consideration of 100 billion, well, and you need to believe the estimates of last year, 79%, but 79% of 3% of total, which is nothing. But it could be a good start. Then we can talk about role of private sector, debt reduction mechanisms, new credit possibility through carbon markets. But this is what we'll be expecting in Sharm, more emphasis on finance, investments, and projects related to that.
Okay, so I have to ask you about David Malpass. You had spent quite a bit of time at the World Bank.
Yeah.
There was some concern about the remarks he made about whether he believes in that emissions are responsible for global warming. Was that somewhat of a disappointment? Do you feel that the World Bank could provide a lot more support for the effort than you've seen so far?
Well, the World Bank is doing a lot in terms of supporting climate finance recently. I would expect the leadership of the institution that I had the honor working for almost 10 years to do more, and we're expecting from them strong support, especially for low-income countries and middle-income countries. The technical support, the recent investments, including in a couple of projects in Africa, like in Bimban in Egypt and Ouazzazate in Morocco, with other MDBs as an example. Views of leaders, I really like to refrain from commenting on personal views of different presidents of different institutions, but I would really like to take the issue when it comes to the role of the World Bank. Can the World Bank do more? Definitely yes. And I would say that one of the best mechanisms of the World Bank, not the IBRD type of finance, it comes from IDA because it's one of the most flexible mechanisms to low-income countries. What I hope is to see, and this could be a bit aggressive for some people who are familiar with the World Bank, I hope to see IDA terms extended to low middle income countries. Because if you are talking to Africa today, half of the African countries are low middle income countries, the other half is low income. So it will be wonderful to see IDA finance going to low middle income countries. And that happened before in some special circumstances, like the cases in dealing with refugees, when the World Bank supported Lebanon and Jordan for dealing with the Syrian refugees, did the same in dealing with the crisis in Venezuela as well. So the technical solutions are there. And I would say that let's see the new replenishment of IDA to be much more supportive, more generous with its mechanism. And with IDA, you get IFC with its private sector partnership. MEGA is required as well for the kind of investments to support that. With the rest of the MDBs, I think we can do a wonderful job in leveraging and all that. But again, personal views, be them positive or negative, are attributed to those who have said them.
Okay, so Sharm el-Sheikh and Egypt sort of, staking out a position as a leader in Africa on climate change. What do you, what does sort of, what is it about Egypt that sort of supports this notion of them having a leadership role, and what it is that they're trying to do what's the message they're trying to send? What are they trying to achieve to sort of justify that, particularly within Africa?
Well, as I say, if you are interested to participate in Sharm el-Sheikh, you are more than welcome. But you will be even more welcome if you are coming not just with pledges and promises, you are coming with finance, investments, and projects. This is what is being expected from a COP on climate that from the very beginning, from day one, it was focusing only on one thing: implementation, implementation, implementation. There is no way that we can achieve better than what Paris Agreement had really resulted in. There is no way that we can really beat the good terminologies and acronyms used during Glasgow of all of these coalitions, the GFANs, and the race to zero and the race to resilience. I'm happy with all of these coalitions. I'm happy with the Paris Agreement. Let's then push whatever we have of them. And this is basically the implementation spirit. We need more data. We need more technical and capacity development support. And definitely it's all about finance and beyond the 100 billion, because only focusing on 100 billion important. And I know that many colleagues and friends, their life is basically about counting beans and putting people under review and scrutiny on who submitted and who didn't. I'm happy to see the reports, including the fantastic report by ODI on the heat map on who paid and who didn't. But beyond the 100 billion, you need the trillions of finance that should come from public finance sources, but perfectly aligned with the sustainability, not just with the climate action. And then by that I mean SDGs, not just SDG 13,
right?
All of the SDGs. And then the great opportunities that are there for the private sector. And we're not talking about something new. Those who have been involved in solar energy, in now in the new MOUs for green hydrogen, those who are working hard in wind farms, in decarbonization, including the hard-to-abate sectors, they see the outcomes and the results. We're not after charity and donations here. We're after decent business deals. Some concessional finance for low-income countries will be great as well to have. But there is a strong business case for climate today.
Great. I see that my time is starting to dwindle away. So why don't I ask a final question, unless you're up for staying longer. But I wanted to get a sense, there have been a lot of reports in the press over the last couple of weeks, concerns about the high prices of hotels in Sharm el-Sheikh, and some NGOs sort of expressing concerns about the affordability and access. And also, I'll take this as a sort of a small line from an article in my former publication, Foreign Policy, where it says, behind the scenes, the Egyptian government has cracked down on environmental activists in the country through harassment, intimidation, and arrest. So I was hoping you could address those. Is this going to be a receptive environment? And what comment you have on some of these reports from human rights groups?
Egypt and Sharm are very well prepared to host a UN-based conference in terms of its approaches, arrangements, organization. It's UNFCCC, what you saw in Glasgow in arrangements, and all of that, you'll see it in Sharm el-Sheikh. Matters related to hotels and affordability, usual complaints, but Sharm definitely is going to be much more affordable than Glasgow, definitely in New York. But again, with reference to the previous UN hosted and arranged UNFCCC COPs, you'll see Egypt not just in pleasant weather, but rich agenda and great hospitality ready for all of them.
Right, and then on
and for the concerns of the NGOs, again, the main rules apply. It's the UN rules that apply. You register, you get your right to participate. What you got in treatment in Glasgow and before, you will be getting it no less, no more in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Right, but the reports on crackdowns on environmentalists and others, I mean, is that, do you have some sort of response to that? I mean,
well, I think the authorities responded to that. I'm not in a position to deal with particular cases, but I read the foreign policy piece as you did, and I think there was a response that has nothing to do with that. I read it like that. As a global climate champion, I do the overall kind of support for the COP to be successful.
All right. I think I've run out of time about a minute ago.
But I've loved to talk more about that, but well, time constraints.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for participating in this.
No, thank you so much, and looking forward to welcome you and all of the participants here in Sharm el-Sheikh.
All right.
Thank you so much.